Hello everybody, welcome to Automotive World. I'm Martin Carl, I'm the editor of Automotive World, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, which is entitled Future-Proofing to Secure the Connected Automotive Ecosystem. To talk us through this subject, I'm pleased to be joined by Stacy Janes, who's Chief Security Architect at Irdeto. A little bit of background to the topic. New vulnerabilities that grant low-level system access to a hacker are becoming increasingly common, and it's been shown that a new vulnerability will hit the streets just weeks or months after the product does. The auto industry's challenge, therefore, is to deploy a connected ecosystem that will remain secure, and OEMs must take the zero-day advantage away from attackers by future-proofing these systems. Over-the-air updates or OTA systems can push down fixes, but those fixes need to be implemented and thoroughly tested. Over the next hour or so, Stacy Janes will outline how future-proofing can allow automotive systems to remain secure during that critical time frame. The time frame that exists between when an attacker discovers a vulnerability and when the system is eventually updated to protect against such an attack. We're going to have a half-hour or so presentation followed by a Q&A session. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box on your screen. Type your question in there and we'll put as many relevant questions as possible to Stacy in the time that remains. But for now, all you're going to hear is a presentation entitled Future-Proofing to Secure the Connected Automotive Ecosystem. Stacy, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. So hope everybody can see the presentation here. Like Martin said, my name is Stacy Janes. I'm the Chief Security Architect at the Connected Transport Division of Irdeto. I've been doing cybersecurity in some form for almost my entire career. I use 25 years because I don't want to date myself anymore, but I've been doing it quite a long time. I've been doing it as a developer, as an architect, and for a few years as an ethical hacker inside of Irdeto, looking at the other markets that Irdeto is in. My contact details are here if anybody has questions after the webinar, but feel free to ask questions right at the end as well. So a little bit about Irdeto. We are part of the NASPERS group of companies. Irdeto's been around for about 50 years. It was the security division for the NASPERS group of companies. It is about 1,000 people large and works in multiple markets with cybersecurity. I come from what's called a cloakware division, which has connected transport inside of it. And cloakware has, as you can see by the stats on the side, it's been around for a while and is very active in protecting endpoint and embedded devices. But enough about me. So today I want to talk about future-proofing. The idea that when a vulnerability is found, what you want to do, or what you have to do, is be able to, from the time that the vulnerability is discovered, whether it's by a hacker or it's, disclosed, there's going to be a time between that period of time and when it actually gets fixed, and you don't want to be exposed during that. That exists in pretty much every market that cybersecurity exists in, and it was the same for the automotive industry. So there are basically three guarantees in life: death, taxes, and those I really can't help you with, but the last one is really vulnerabilities. The reality is that vulnerabilities are caused by human error. The definition of vulnerability, as you see here, is defined by NIST, is that it's a weakness in a security system that allows that system to be exploited or breached, to be in violation of that system's security policy. But there's a specific type of vulnerability that I really want to talk about, and that is the zero-day vulnerability. So the zero-day vulnerability, and I've seen some different definitions. They all kind of try to get to the same point. I like the Wikipedia one the most. The zero-day vulnerability is basically a vulnerability that someone else has discovered but is not necessarily known to the people who would want to mitigate it, most likely the vehicle owner or the software provider, but somebody, whether or not they are a researcher who will disclose or an attacker who won't disclose, it is a vulnerability that already exists in the market. So it is something that you may not know about, but somebody else does. And this is really where the problems start to happen. So the real problem is, how do you defend against something that you don't know exists? When a vulnerability is found, there's a period of time between when it is discovered and when it can be patched. So in the automotive industry, that time can be quite long. There's development, there's testing, and in automotive that there's certain processes to go around that. So how do you keep affected vehicles safe during that period? How do you protect against a vulnerability that you don't even know about? We saw recently the Keen Lab team put out a report against one of the OEMs that they're doing research on, and I think they found something like 14 vulnerabilities that were not previously known. Now, Keen guys are good guys. They disclose to the OEM, they're working with the OEM. But if that wasn't a friendly team, if that was a malicious team, then those vulnerabilities would be known by the team, but would not be known by the OEM. In reality, people actually protect against zero-day vulnerabilities every day. People are always exposed to threats, and although we do not fully understand what the threat is, we learn how to protect ourselves, our possessions, our families, and in the face of what we figure can be a threat. Most people do that in a realistic, security in-depth way that assumes some layers of what they're doing may not mitigate the problem, but others will. They don't think about it in that way, but that is realistically what they do. So cybersecurity is conceptually the same as physical security. The real difference is in the implementation. And we can use existing knowledge of what we do every day for different types of physical and personal security to understand concepts in the cybersecurity space. So when we look at a physical fence or a barrier, we understand if it's possible to circumvent it. Is it tall? Is it short? Can we knock it over? Can we climb it? Can we get over the top? Is there a subterranean element to it that we can't get under? So with physical security, it's a lot easier to understand because we can see it. Because we cannot see cybersecurity, the experts obviously can, but most people, when they look at it, because they cannot see cybersecurity, they kind of view it as a black art. And because we can see and feel physical security, we have a better understanding of it. So I find the easiest way to talk about cybersecurity is to actually talk about physical security. So I want to use an example that most people would be familiar with from a security standpoint, and that example is actually a family's home. The family home, or our example here, is a typical two-story house, that's common in the areas, at least that where I live. For homeowners, we have gone through the process of deciding how much security we feel we need based on our budgets, based on what risk we understand. And a lot of times people don't quite understand the risk. If you've ever talked to someone who has had their house broken into, one of the things they'll say is, I never thought it would happen in this neighborhood. It's a safe neighborhood, all this kind of thing. And, typically that would be the house you want to go after because as an attacker that someone who lives in a dangerous neighborhood is going to take a lot of precautions where someone who lives in a very safe neighborhood won't. So you can actually, there's a part of social engineering to this where you look at who you think is going to offer protection and who is not. And then you can go after the things that you don't think will offer as much protection. So that also exists in the cybersecurity space. There was an attack, well, the famous one is Target. Target actually had, they got hacked a few years ago, and the hack actually came through the HVAC company. Target had employed a lot of security, but the HVAC company, not feeling that they were at risk, did not do as much. There was another attack where a casino lost some very valuable information, and although that information and the ecosystem around it was secured, there was an element on that network, which was actually the thermometer in the fish tank in the lobby, and the thermometer wasn't secured. And attackers, just like anybody else who's going to try to steal something, think in the same way. Who's going to secure what? Who's going to put in the effort? So sometimes the safest neighborhoods can actually be at a higher risk just because people won't necessarily do as much. So similar to an industry, connecting their products and realizing that there's a problem, homeowners kind of went through the same thing. So when we see that when new industries show up to connected markets, a lot of times they don't realize the threat that they're under. And the research community, or a malicious hacking community gets involved, and that's when these markets, these industries start realizing, oh, there's actually a problem. We just wanted to connect stuff. We wanted to bring users new features, and what we did was we accidentally opened some doors that we didn't realize we had left open. So we see this a lot, and that's kind of why it happens. It happens on a personal level, it happens on an industrial level, and it really just comes down to understanding what, your risk really is when you start doing something like this. So it's easy to keep an intruder out of your house. All you really had to do is just remove all the doors, remove all the windows, and make a big cinder block cube. Now, the reality is that makes the house pretty useless unless you actually want to own a bunker. So we need to employ security so that you can protect the structure with all of its entry points so that the people who own the house can actually enjoy the house the way they want, and the security protects what has been, what the requirements are, as opposed to putting other requirements on it. Said, all you have to do is take the doors and windows out, the house is pretty secure, but that's not what we want. So in our example home here, it's a 2-story house, all the exterior doors are locked, all the ground floor windows are locked, there's no obvious access to the 2nd-story windows. That way, on a cool summer evening, you can leave the 2nd-story windows open at night, and you can figure no one can get in. And there's bars on the basement windows and other easy access points. So when you look at this, it's like, okay, I think we've got it covered. At night, I think we'll feel pretty safe in this house. But what we've come down to is really the 0 day, right? We all understand that if somebody really wants to break into our house, they can. They can either smash a window, they can drive a truck through the front door. So we put mitigations in place, but we understand that someone who, if they're really, really determined to get into our house, that they will be able to do it, and we just don't know how. So in this particular house, there was actually a vulnerability, and the vulnerability was that we left a ladder in the backyard shed, and that shed was protected by a $3 padlock. Now, most people, when they buy padlocks and they put a padlock on something, they think, okay, it's locked, it's secure. But as someone who knows how to pick locks, and we actually teach our development teams how to pick locks as kind of to get them into this mindset, you don't have to learn how to pick locks for very long, like just a couple hours will do. And you can get through most hardware store, purchased padlocks in seconds sometimes. So if you have a thief that either shows up at bolt cutters or lock picks, that padlock can be removed. And all of a sudden now they have access to a ladder. And what the ladder gives them access to was the 2nd floor that we previously thought was not available. So not only did this vulnerability allow someone into the house uninvited, but it also caused an access point to move from the ground floor, where we keep most of our possessions, our computers are down there, TV, stuff like that, but it moved to the 2nd floor where the primary assets of the home is, and the primary assets being obviously the people. So in our attempt to secure our home, we've accidentally increased the threat to the primary asset of the house. In a lot of the work that I've done previously, I've seen this happen in the cybersecurity field a lot. People do what they think is the obvious thing. They protect what what the parts that they understand. They don't understand some of the more complex parts of it, and they end up exposing parts of the system that shouldn't be exposed because they drive the hacker to look for something, they got past the obvious stuff and they look for something a little bit harder, and they end up in a part of the system that actually becomes more exposed. So it's not it's actually, and I use this particular example for that reason. It actually, it happens more than you want, but, and this is where threat risk assessments, we hear about them, J3061 talks about them, and we see them more and more in the industry. And this is really where a threat risk assessment comes in, because you want an expert in that type of security to show up and say, yes, doors, windows, ground floor level, that's all great. Bars in the basement windows, that's all great. But do you realize that I can get through this lock and grab this ladder and get into your 2nd floor? So the threat risk assessment on any product, whether or not it's your home or your business or your product, is a really thorough way to ensure that you don't accidentally, create a threat that exposes a more sensitive asset. And it will take into consideration the fact that there's going to be vulnerabilities that are not announced that it will not know about, and it will make assumptions about where those vulnerabilities can be. So we have our house. We've got a vulnerability in our house that we don't know about. So how do we solve that? And when most people start putting security on their homes, they'll do very typical things. So in our example home, someone picked a lock on the shed, they used a ladder, they got into the second floor window. Well, one of the first things people do is exterior lighting. You light up the area around the home so that you can see someone coming, and maybe your neighbors can see somebody. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get rid of their ability to poke at the front door or pick at the windows or pick the lock in a stealth mode. We're seeing more and more internet cameras coming onto the market, and there's more and more YouTube videos of people actually posting footage from their internet cameras of someone either taking something from their house or someone poking around their house. I have a coworker who has one of these doorbell cameras. We were traveling in Europe, and his doorbell rings. Now it's middle of the afternoon here in Canada, but it was evening in Europe. He picks up his phone and he sees the image of this person at the front door. This person is someone he doesn't know, and they're holding something in their hand that looks like some tools. So he says through his phone, "Hi, I don't know you, what's in your hand?" And the person at the door actually turned and took off. He sent a picture that he captured to the local police to, let them know this happened. We kind of thought he was being a bit paranoid, but the police responded going, "Yeah, we know that guy." So, he saw someone coming, and before they even tried to break into the exterior, he was able to use a mitigation to drive that person away. So that is step one in, how people want to protect their home. So step two, door and window alarms, right? What we want to do is, as an attacker tries to come through a window or tries to come through a door, when these openings get opened without them supposed to being open, so they're armed, there will be an alarm. So the alarm can either notify the homeowner, the alarm can notify authorities, however you have it set up. But the reality is we can detect unauthorized access. We can detect someone trying to come in when they're not supposed to come in. Now, in the case of our example home, we did not have alarms on the second story windows because we wanted to be able to leave them open at night and because we didn't think there was access. So that was a vulnerability in our home, even though we had alarms set up in other spaces. And this is a good example of how we can have, multiple layers in security, and sometimes one of the layers doesn't catch something. So, and that's really why you want a security in-depth strategy, because sometimes someone will figure out how to get through layer 2 or layer 1, and you want layer 3 to catch them. And that's really what security in-depth is about. So let's say someone gets in, they climbed in through the window. Well, now what you want to do is you want to detect that they're actually in the house. So interior motion detectors. This is a pretty common part of home alarm systems. And really what it does is it detects incorrect behavior in the home. And that incorrect behavior is that there's something moving that's not supposed to be moving when the alarm is set. And these things can be tuned so that pets can walk around, but it'll detect people. So the interior motion detectors will detect an incorrect behavior, and when the system is fully armed, that behavior will be monitored, and it should understand that there's no movement. So any movement will be considered misbehavior, and the alarm will alert based on how it's designed. Alert authorities, it'll alert the homeowner, it'll record it. So up till now, what we're looking at is we can see someone showing up to the outside, we can see them trying to break in, and then we can see them if they have got in. We can do that based on behavior, and we can actually do that based on detection, the detection being that the door or window actually opened. So far we've been able to detect it, but really what you want to do is you want to stop it. So for anyone that lives with a dog, you know that a dog will detect when something or someone that is not supposed to be in the house has gained entry, right? I grew up in a house with two German Shepherds when I was a kid, And if you entered my house and you weren't with someone from my family and you weren't supposed to be there, then you'd have a very big dog in your face very, very quickly. You know, those dogs would basically stop you in your tracks. And that's really one of the steps you're looking for. Yes, you want to be able to detect what's going on, but you also need to stop what's going on, right? You don't want to be notified after that everything went wrong. You want to be able to see someone approaching. You want to be able to see what they're trying to do. You want to be able to try to drive them away using initial steps of, you know, barriers they have to cross. But if they do get through that and say, you know what, someone did break in and they are in the house, you want to be able to stop them from doing any kind of damage. And if you can, you want to be able to gather enough information so that you can, you know, possibly have them caught. And also, anybody who owns a dog, any size dog, will know that a dog will alarm as soon as somebody enters the home. So you also have notification. With this strategy, and this is like a fairly common strategy. Now you can have variations. You know, some people will have firearms or other kind of things in the house as well. But this is a basic kind of strategy where you have multiple layers of detection and detection, and detection, protection, and response. So that what you're going to do is you're going to drive away the intruder as fast as his square little legs will carry him. And if you do this, you know, sufficiently well, the reality is, in any kind of, you know, where someone wants to steal something or break into something, whether it's a home or a connected device, they're looking for the easiest way in, all other things being equal. I mean, if you're a specific target, you're a specific target. But all other things being equal, they're going to look for the easy target. And if you make yourself too hard of a target, then they're going to go somewhere else. In the space of, you know, criminal monetary-based cybersecurity, and what ends up happening is hacking is a business. So if they had to spend $1 million to make $1 million, well, I mean, any business is not going to do that. So they're going to look for the easiest and cheapest way that they can pull off the biggest hack they can. And if you have enough mitigations in place, whether or not it's trying to break into your home or trying to break into a connected system, if you have enough mitigations in place, that will drive them to, you know, either a different market or a completely different section, so that, you know, it's not valuable for them to actually do what they're doing to you. So, you know, and if you have enough information, maybe the dog caught him, you know, maybe the camera caught him, but if you have enough information, you can actually see, you know, this person can also get caught or arrested. So, you know, with the proper alerting and monitoring, you know, maybe we can not only deter, but we can actually have the authorities catch the person. We see this all the time when it comes to, you know, neighborhood-related crime. But the thing is, we also see this a lot when it comes to cybercrime. In the automotive space right now, most of the work that we see being done is researcher-based. So obviously, you know, our little researcher Lego guy wouldn't be in handcuffs. But any malicious intent that's trying to cause harm, this is really where you want to end up, right? You want the person caught so that they don't move on to other targets. So, you know, in the end of all that, we drove the guy away. He wasn't able to do any damage. He didn't get to any of the family. Maybe he got caught. What does that leave us? Well, you know, the homeowner is then going to want to go through and figure out, well, what went wrong? What do I need to fix? So security is one of the few engineering practices where there's a human adversary. So in areas like safety, you know, crashing into a cement wall is crashing into a cement wall. The engineering is working with a known physical condition. You test the same wall over and over and over again, or maybe you make variations to the wall, but they're known. With security, it's a person versus a person. So just as the engineering team and the security team is trying to increase the security and is innovating all the time, the reality is the attackers are doing the same thing. Between collusion on darknet forums and, you know, and research on their own and innovation on their own, this is a person versus a person. So security is never really static. And, you know, you want to be able to monitor what happened to you so you can say, okay, I found the vulnerability in my house. I'm going to fix the vulnerability in my house. So in this case, maybe they put a better lock on the shed. Maybe they put the ladder inside of the house. And maybe they put a different kind of alarm system on the second story window so that they can use the window the way they want, keep it open in the spring and cool summer nights. but they can also, if somebody passes through that entryway, that they can actually detect it. So you want to be able to figure out, be able to track and get enough data from what this person did. If you just come home and everything looks fine, but your house is empty, you don't know what happened. So, these strategies not only protect what's going on, but they also give you enough information to make updates so that when if the person comes back, they don't try plan B and, get away with something. So you want to be able to update your weak spots. So, okay, that's great. We just talked about, how does someone protect our house, but what does that really have to do with the automotive industry? So, good question. Glad you asked. In the automotive industry, our exterior cameras and lights, it's equivalent to behavioral analytics on the external network traffic that's coming into the vehicle. So you want to be able to look at who's pounding on the front door of the connection. And if you talk to IT specialists who work on cloud systems and server systems and operation centers and stuff like that, they'll actually tell you that they see a lot of traffic that's basically, whether it's botnets doing it or humans doing it, that's actually pounding on the front door of all of these connected devices, and it's looking for vulnerabilities that are known, right? So it's exploring different types of known vulnerabilities, and it's just pounding on the front door of a whole bunch of things that are connected. And it doesn't care whether or not it's an ECU in a car, whether it's a smart television or a cloud. It's just trying to figure out a way to get into some kind of ecosystem. So a lot of that traffic you want to be able to monitor. And in a space where you're talking about an automobile, you can have a big installed base, and that installed base is moving around. So maybe you realize, well, this one vehicle is getting all kinds of weird traffic all day long, so maybe somebody's actually working on it. Or maybe you realize a whole bunch of vehicles get a very specific type of pattern when they pass a certain, geographical location. So maybe there's a malicious parking garage connection, or there's a malicious drive-through, who knows. But you can figure out these kinds of patterns, and then you can start making, decisions based on them. So the second one is we want to be able to keep people out. So yeah, we're monitoring all this traffic, but we don't actually want them to get in. So protection against entry, that's your classic firewall. And this is very well known in all the IT spaces. I mean, pretty much every network has one. Having a wireless connection is similar to doors and windows on your house. You only want the things that are allowed to come in. So whether or not it's a burglar entering through the back door of your house or a skunk coming in through the doggy door, and although you may think that's funny, talk to dog owners who've had doggy doors, you don't want anything that's unwanted coming in, and you don't want malicious connections being able to get through. So you put up a wall, you put up a barrier that says only certain things are allowed to get in, and we're going to monitor that. So what happens if someone actually exploits a vulnerability and gets past that firewall? And this is really where vulnerabilities, where we see vulnerabilities in the connected and, cyberspace. This is really what they end up doing is good traffic can cause bad things to happen, and then those bad things can, let someone gain access. So, okay, someone gets past our firewall. Well, we can look at the traffic coming in. That traffic bypassed our firewall for whatever reason. So what we want to be able to do is we want to look at behavior and see what's going on inside the vehicle, right? Someone has gotten in, and we want to be able to see any kind of misbehavior whatsoever. And this is, where our motion detector comes in. And whether or not it's on the ECU or also on internal vehicle networks, we want to be able to see this right off the bat so that we can take that data and combine it with the data of the traffic originally trying to come into the vehicle. So then we have our dog. Okay, someone's gotten in, we see bad behavior, we don't like what's going on, right? It looks bad, but what you need to back that up is you need a deterministic decision maker. You're saying, you know what, that's not right, and we're going to stop it. So when this person tries to do some damage, you want to be able to detect that damage, you want to be able to stop that damage, and you want to be able to report on that damage. And you have to be able to do it at runtime. I'm a big fan of secure boot, but Secure Boot does it on boot time. So you want to be able to do that when things boot, when things start, when things are running, and you want to be able to catch it as soon as you can. So now that we have this security in-depth strategy in place, our attack has been detected, our attack has been stopped, but can we do any more? And like a homeowner going through all the logs and looking at damage to the house and stuff like that, they're really gathering data. So, with telemetry and cloud-based analytics, the operations center can look at what happened to a vehicle. They can look at what happened to multiple vehicles across the install base. They can look at multiple OEMs if they're sharing information, and they could even look across multiple industries. You may see traffic that's common to, cloud-based attacks hitting a car, because really the thing that's attacking may not know what it's attacking. I've seen instances of Android malware locking smart TVs because the TV was running Android and the malware thought it got onto a phone. So the more data sharing you have in this space where people are saying, well, this is the kind of thing we're seeing and these are the patterns we're seeing, and then you can do analysis on not only, well, that traffic, but okay, they got past my firewall, but my in-vehicle analytics shows this, and my tamper detection shows something else. So from that, you can build up a profile of this is what's happened, and maybe you could even track it back to an identity for law enforcement. In Irdeto, we've been in this space for not necessarily the automotive space, but we've been in the cybersecurity space for quite a while, and we spend a lot of time dealing with law enforcement. In fact, we have a group dedicated to dealing with law enforcement in different countries to help catch people that are, maliciously acting towards someone's business interests. And the telemetry, computer telemetry is great, and we gather as much as we can. But the reality is being able to get as much information as you can. So that team will actually, they have other ways of also getting information from looking at darknet and all this kind of stuff. But being able to gather this information and figure out who's doing what and how they're doing it is critical in being able to stay ahead of the attackers. Like I said, it's a cat and mouse game, and the reality is you want to be the cat. You always want to be ahead, and this is one of the critical parts of staying ahead. And similar to our homeowner fixing their home, that information then can be used to say, okay, they got in, we detected who they were, we stopped them, we stopped that attack, we've shared some information, we know a lot about it, so what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to fix that, and that could be across multiple OEMs. We're going to fix that so that somebody doesn't come in and try that again. And that's the same thing as our homeowner, fixing their windows and locking up their, locking up their ladder. So this gives us a really good way to, keep the vehicle ahead of the hacking community. Like I said, it's really person versus person, then it's innovation against innovation. So you really want to be able to stay on top of things, monitor what's going on, and you want to be able to be updated. And I mean, it's great to say, I'd love to stick security in a car and have it there for 20 years or, whatever the life of the car is. But if you go back 20 years, we were using DES and we're using SHA-1, and, return-oriented programming really wasn't a thing. So methods changed, technologies changed, and, security has to keep up with that. So how does Irdeto help? Like I said, we've been doing this for a long time. And we've built up a lot of experience over the years of how people break into things, and whether it's hardware hacks or software hacks or cloud-based attacks. And from that, we've built up a portfolio of what we think works in various industries. The big one is behavioral profiling and analytics. So this also says anomaly uncovering, and I'll get to that in a second. But really what this is you want to be able to learn about, the invalid traffic, and being able to see what's coming in is really critical to part of, putting together a final solution. Rules-based connectivity enforcement, firewalls. Simple concept, it's very, very common across the IT space, but it's absolutely mandatory. I mean, there's no sense protecting most of your house if you don't actually put door locks on things. Vehicle level profiling and anomaly uncovering. So you want to be able to take patterns from in the vehicle and patterns from outside the vehicle and put them together and say, maybe that, the attack that's coming in is a completely new type of vulnerability. You didn't know about it, somebody else has discovered it. Well, you need to figure out what it was. And this anomaly uncovering, using with the back-end analytics, this is really what's going to help with that. You can look at these patterns and say, I can figure out enough about what they did that I understand the vulnerability that they found, and I can fix that vulnerability. Otherwise, the vulnerability stays there. And instead, sharing across OEMs and sharing across brands and even sharing across markets really helps accelerate that kind of knowledge base. Tampering detection and prevention. You need a deterministic way to say, that's not good, we can't allow that, we're going to stop that, we're going to alert on it. And in the case of what we provide, we also provide self-healing for critical components. Some things you just can't have changed, and they need to be able to heal themselves even when you're offline, so the internet connection's been cut. And for us, this has been really critical in allowing systems to continue running and be able to withstand attacks. And these are attacks put on by someone who has gained full access, who's gotten in as root, who is flying around and trying to do some damage. And we want to be able to stop that root user who's maliciously gotten access from being able to do any damage, and we want to be able to heal what they're doing. We also add to this IP protection, because there's a lot of now software-based IP in vehicles, and data protection. I mean, we all read GDPR. We know how important data protection is. A lot of us have probably already gone through data loss through other, other industries. We hear about it all the time. Data gets stolen from here and there, and we don't want that to happen to the automotive industry. So along with our tamper detection and prevention, we've also put in, data loss protections and IP protections, so that what's in the vehicle will not change and it will not get lifted. And this all gets backed up by a machine learning analytics, cloud that will be installed in the Security Operations Center. And this brings all this data together. This is where the learning happens. This is where you get to mesh all this data together and figure out what really happened. So from here, you can push out real-time alerts. You can push down remediation, and you can learn to figure out, what that anomaly was, what was that vulnerability. We're going to change it from being just from being a 0-day, we're going to change it from that to being a known vulnerability, and then we're going to work on it and fix it. And at the same time, we know that the person who exploited it, well, they weren't able to do any damage, and it gives us time to, fix it and get a new release out, which means, you need to be OTA compatible. And not only that, we employ a concept called renewable security. What renewable security means is that in some of the markets we work in, some of our customers, what they will do is they will use one of our features called diversity, where you can have things that are functionally equivalent, but diverse in how they look inside. And you can, if you see hacking activity, you can actually push down a functionally equivalent version. So none of the functionality has changed, but the system itself has changed. And what this does is it causes the hacker to, revert back to step one. And this is really useful for, giving us time to work on things, but not only that, for driving hackers away, because when they realize, well, every time I try to do this, this happens, I'm gonna go pick an easier target. So this all falls into the, these categories of products that we're bringing to market. We have protection on the ECU, so it's software, data, and connectivity protection. It's, we can detect bad behavior, and we can actually detect tampering, and we can protect against the tampering, and we can self-heal. And we want to make sure that no data is lost if someone is in there trying to sniff data. We could look at networks, internal and external. We really want to figure out what's going on, who's trying to do what, and be able to pull that data and determine whether or not it's good or bad. And all of that happens in the cloud, so that you can, you get real-time alerting, you can push down remediation, and through our cloud system, we also do a lot of cryptographic key management, and we do that across, multiple spaces. So I hope all that made sense. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Stacy, thank you very much. That's been a really fascinating and quite worrying talk through home protection and vehicle protection. Yeah, as Stacey said, if anybody would like to ask a question, please do type it into the Q&A box on your screen. We'll attempt to address as many as possible in the next 15, 20 minutes or so that remains. I was just wondering, you've talked quite extensively there about the ways in which, or the vulnerabilities that exist for the automotive industry. Can you just perhaps give us a little sense of what the risks are if somebody does get in to a vehicle, does hack a vehicle, or does hack a vehicle system, and the kind of threats that might exist? And I appreciate they are many and varied, but some of the ones that perhaps are the most common, or the things that vehicle manufacturers most commonly worry about.
Yeah, I mean, when we see anything that's connected, I mean, an ECU in a vehicle is really an internet-connected computer. And we see vulnerabilities all the time, whether they're hardware level, OS level, or app level, that in the end will allow a user to get in and a malicious user to get in and gain full.
Please do type it into the Q&A box on your screen. We'll attempt to address as many as possible in the next 15, 20 minutes or so that remains. I was just wondering, you've talked quite extensively there about the ways in which, or the vulnerabilities that exist for the automotive industry. Can you just perhaps give us a little sense of what the risks are if somebody does get in to a vehicle, does hack a vehicle, or does hack a vehicle system, and the kind of threats that might exist? And I appreciate they are many and varied, but some of the ones that perhaps are the most common, or the things that vehicle manufacturers most commonly worry about.
Yeah, I mean, when we see anything that's connected, I mean, an ECU in a vehicle is really an internet-connected computer. And we see vulnerabilities all the time, whether they're hardware level, OS level, or app level, that in the end will allow a user to get in and a malicious user to get in and gain full access, so root access to something. At that point, you can put malware on it. You can steal stuff from it. You can change it so that, I mean, a lot of the research we see kind of goes for the most scary version of taking over vehicle control, and we've seen multiple instances of that. But if you think about something basic like malware, let's say I wanted to ransomware a whole OEM. Well, I can go through a very complicated version of that and push all kinds of crazy stuff to the car. But you know, for malware or ransomware, really what I want to do is make the user not want to drive it. So I'm just going to turn the audio system all the way up and leave it locked. And, you know, maybe it'll be Celine Dion, or maybe it'll be Marilyn Manson. You know, I'll pick your taste and give you the opposite. Because what people are going to do is they'll get in the vehicle, they'll start it. Stereo will be cranked. They'll just have it towed to the dealer. And the dealer will get a whole bunch of cars, and the OEMs will see a whole bunch of dealers got a whole bunch of cars, and then they get a ransomware demand. So, you know, whether or not someone's putting something on there, or they're stealing something from it. And as the OEM's business models change, their risks are going to change. Right now, with personal vehicles, people really don't want to see, you know, anybody stealing data out of the vehicle. They don't want someone taking over the vehicle and causing it to crash or, you know, misbehave or break down and leave someone stranded. But, you know, as we see more subscription-based services and mobility as a service, as that becomes, you know, more and more into scope, we're going to see new business models develop, and those business models will require protection in a different way, right? When somebody else owns the vehicle, well, they're going to want to enforce some things and allow some things, and you want those enforcements and allowances to be, you know, adhered to. So you don't want people using mobility as a service services without paying for it and that kind of thing. So the threats can be wide-ranging depending on the business model. I mean, obviously the scariest one is someone turns your steering wheel and you don't want them to, and as you know, as cars become more computerized and as you get farther down the autonomous route, you know, people think more and more about that. But there's financial threats against the OEM. There's safety threats against the vehicle owner or the vehicle user. And then there's just things like brand damage. You know, if an autonomous car gets hacked, I mean, we're seeing a lot of worrying news, you know, about I think it was the LA Times or someone recently posted an article saying, you know, autonomous cars aren't safe enough to be on the road. It's like, okay. And they're basing that on some of the crashes that have happened. Although those crashes were human-related and not necessarily technology-related, you know, people can get scared pretty quickly of technology they don't understand. And if we see hacks happen in the autonomous industry, that affects the entire autonomous industry. It doesn't care who got hacked. If a ride-sharing company gets hacked with their autonomous car, then the OEMs are going to feel that pressure as well. So, there's a lot at stake simply because the business models are changing, and a lot of new business models are dependent on this connectivity.
You mentioned something interesting during the presentation, which was I think it was an aside that you made about Android-based TVs being locked down because somebody had hacked the operating system and it had gone through to a TV thinking that it was something else. I just wonder if you can perhaps share some thoughts on where the protection needs to be. I mean, can you protect the operating system? Can the hardening, I guess, be made on the operating system rather than on the vehicle so that it doesn't get as far as the vehicle in the first place because it's already protected on the operating system? Or forgive me, I'm not technical, so I don't understand this fully, but it seems to be that there's different places where you can put the protections in. And does it need to be on the vehicle? Does it need to be further away so that it can't even get to the vehicle? How does it work?
Well, this is where the point I was trying to get to across with like a security in-depth strategy. Really, what you need is multiple layers. Obviously, you want your back-end cloud services heavily protected. If somebody gets like administrative access to your cloud so that they now look like somebody in your operations center, well, they can do a lot of damage from there because they can start pushing things, signing and pushing things that aren't supposed to be pushed. So that's where you want behavioral systems in the vehicle to go, okay, I just got this thing and it doesn't really look right. At the same time with, what happened with that Android TV, if someone put malware on it, you want to make sure that, and this is one of the things where we have like our guard dog, right? We want to make sure that anything that enters the vehicle is supposed to be there. And if it's not supposed to be there, we won't actually let it do any damage. So if somebody puts malware on our TV, the malware actually can't do anything to the TV. That includes protecting the operating system and protecting all the user space applications that go along with it. And understanding how people attack things becomes important. Like if you want to attack a cloud system, well, one of the really good ways to do it is you get one of its clients that trusts it. And you use that client to attack its cloud because those two actually trust each other. So if you get traffic from something you trust, you'll actually do more with it than if you get traffic from something you don't trust. And I used to use this when I was doing some of the work against, there's hacking communities out there that were going after some of our customers, and we, engage with some of those elements. And I used to run attacks like that where I would, pretend I would have a malicious version of their client attacking their server, because if you're not trusted, you only get a part way in the door. But if you're fully trusted, you get really far in. There's more vulnerabilities, there's more software you can run, there's more things you have access to. So, the vehicle can sometimes, or just the connected endpoint, can be used as an attack point for cloud, or if you get in the cloud, that can be an attack point for the vehicle. So our security in-depth strategy, really understands that not only do you want to keep the element secure, but you want to understand that maybe what you're talking to is being malicious, and you want to have a technology that you understand will be able to tell you if that's going on. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but it's having one layer will most times not work. You need to have like you have an ecosystem of connectivity, you need to have an ecosystem of security to sit on top of it.
Okay, this might be quite an obvious question, but how vulnerable is the auto industry, and how well equipped is it to defend itself in the sort of situations that you've talked about?
Well, I mean, we've seen attacks against, now they're researcher based. We've seen hacks against multiple OEMs so far, and they're becoming, more complex as opposed to finding a front door that was open. They're finding vulnerabilities that were a little bit harder to find. Anything that's connected, especially if you didn't really see it coming. When the connectivity happened before people start designing security in, there's going to be vulnerabilities. And even after that, vulnerabilities are simply human error. You have to assume they're going to be there. You have to assume that someone is going to figure out a way to get in. So right now the automotive industry, they're spending a lot of work figuring out how do we fix the problem that we have. And and they're doing it in a very automotive way, right? There's a lot of analysis. Everybody's learning. So there's where we are right now and where we will be in a few years. And from what I see, I do have a pretty sunny outlook on, I think, where they'll end up. Right now we are seeing things against new vehicles, and there's a lot of connected devices out there right now that are vulnerable. But it is an industry that's really trying to wrap its head around the problem and trying to find the best way, because everybody has their own restrictions and everybody has their own requirements, and trying to find the best way to make sure that they can bring their features to their customers that their customers really want. They can do it in a way where the security doesn't interfere with that, because it's like making a house with no windows. Great, it's secure, but I can't see anything. And being able to do it so so that it matches up with everything else they're trying to do. So how common is cybersecurity problems in the industry right now? Well, there's a lot of vulnerabilities floating around. I think is a pretty safe assumption. But we're seeing a lot of work towards putting in protection so that when those vulnerabilities are exploited, that the damage won't be done.
Okay. Can we talk about the slightly thorny subject of cost here? How much cost is added to a vehicle or added to a vehicle manufacturer's cost base when we're talking about things like, you mentioned renewable security,
yeah,
which I get is something that needs to be done constantly. We've talked about always trying to keep at least one step ahead of the hackers. All of this it's not a fixed cost. It's an ongoing battle against potential vulnerabilities. It's not like protecting a vehicle against water, where that once you protect it against water, it's protected. So how much additional cost is this adding to the vehicle manufacturers, to the app developers, to the different stakeholders that are involved in bringing a vehicle to market and keeping it operational and keeping it connected in the way that customers want? They want as much connectivity as possible. They want all these services. They want to be able to use their car as a credit card or as an entertainment infotainment system that is connected and is completely up to date. All of that adds ongoing chasing and firefighting.
Yeah, so I won't have a dollar value.
No, I understand.
Yeah, what's going to cost? So there's obviously going to be product cost, right? Kind of like you're buying seatbelts to put in your car. You're going to buy security products to put in your car. There's going to be educational cost. So you're going to want to build. The OEMs are going to build, if they haven't done already, and most of them are going to build security teams. So there's going to be salaried costs for having security people there. There's going to be costs related to understanding these new attacks are coming, like DEF CON just finished. There's the car hacking village of DEF CON. We're still seeing researcher-based activity in DEF CON. But at the same time, you really want to know, okay, well, that's what the researchers are saying, and that's all very valuable. But you also want to know what's going on in the more malicious side of things. Like I said, at Irdeto, we actually have a team of people, and their job is to interact with law enforcement, and their job is to kind of keep an eye on the darker side of things so that, we can keep ahead of it. So there's going to be human costs in learning and staying on top of things. For development costs, there's adding new things. So it'll be around the same thing as, whether or not you're trying to add a new type of technology. That technology is whether it's autonomous-based or security-based. There'll be costs in that. And for things like renewable security, this is a balance between an ounce of prevention and a pound of cure. It's, you build it into your strategy. So people talk about security and safety and how they overlap. And in my view, from a practical point, they do. They're completely overlapping. But from an engineering point of view, they're actually quite different. Like I said, if you take a car and drive a car into a barrier, and then you measure everything, and then you do it again, a year later, same car, same barrier, the results, I hope, are the same. With security, the result could be different 5 minutes from now. And when you're dealing with researchers, you get to stand there next to the barrier, well, not too close, but you get to be there and you get to measure everything with the researcher. When you get to the point where the industry gets to malicious hacking, what's going to happen is you're going to hear that someone crashed your car into a barrier. We don't know anything about what the barrier was made out of, and we don't know how fast the car was going, and you don't get to see any of it, and everyone died. How about that? And although that sounds, I know, a little dramatic, what's going to happen is something happened and you don't know what it was. And this is really where telemetry comes in, and this is really where analytics comes in, is that you really need to know what's going on in vehicles out there. So the expense in the automotive industry for security will go up if they stay far enough ahead of the people who will be malicious. The people who will be malicious probably won't show up, right? If it's just too expensive, it's too expensive, because as you know, they'll increase the attacker's costs as well. If they don't stay ahead of them, when that group shows up, what they do costs more, because now you had to figure out what they did, and you had to figure it within a certain time frame, right? Because you know, there could be press and brand damage involved and all this other kind of thing. So on the OEM side, there's human costs and salary costs and learning costs and testing costs, but those are easier to measure when you know, if you build it in from the beginning and you're comfortable with what you built and you know, you're educated on what you built. That's a lot different than if you didn't get it right and someone malicious shows up and does a lot of damage. Well, then you have a bigger problem to deal with, right? Because then you'll have cost-related new regulations and all kinds of stuff that that we know are going to happen if you know, we end up going down that road. Does that kind of answer what you were getting at?
There's plenty of detail in there. Thank you very much. Yeah. Other than dollar amounts, which I know is impossible to put those numbers on, but yeah, it's certainly interesting to see the number of things that need to be considered. And on that point, the number of things that need to be considered, you mentioned that fascinating case study early on about the way that I think you said it was either a casino or a hotel that had been hacked through the temperature gauge on a fish tank. And I just wonder if you can give some thoughts to what the most common attack vectors are, or some of the most fascinating, perhaps overlooked attack vectors might be on a vehicle.
So, and it's not just limited to a vehicle. The easiest way to attack something is to get into the ecosystem through the less protected means. So let's say you had a group of friends, and one person was, you know, the decision maker, and they were the most street smart. So if I wanted to try to con that person and convince them of something, it's probably going to be very, very hard. But let's say they had a friend who they completely trusted, and that friend was completely naive, right? Well, I would try to convince the naive friend, and then the naive friend would convince the street smart friend. So if the street smart guy understood the other guy was naive, then he would go, yeah, that's just Bob, and Bob believes everything. But if he didn't realize that, then it'd be easier to influence him. And it's the same theory for attacking ecosystems. If you are connected to something that you trust, so I have my PKI cert and that other thing has its PKI cert, and we all exchange keys and we all trust each other. Just because we trust each other doesn't mean what's coming down the pipe is good. And so kind of like what happened with Target and what happened with this casino, getting into this ecosystem through any means that you can. And you know what you're going to look at as an attacker is you're going to say, well, who has the lowest margins? Who can spend the least on security? What's the cheapest product, right? The thermometer is obviously going to have way lower margins than the guy who built the database to store all this information the casino was holding. So go after the thing with the lowest margins, and then from there, what you're going to do is you're going to take advantage of trust as you work your way through the network. So this is why parsing data becomes so vitally important. Data parsing through any kind of connection, no matter how much you trust it, is vital, because you know, if they can create a secure connection to you, that means they just got through the digital signature phase, they just got through the decryption phase, and now they're in your data parser. So they've worked their way pretty far into your system. And you know, people want to make things run faster, so maybe they remove some checks and they're saying, well, you know, this is trusted information, so I'll just go to bit number 8 and grab what's there. You know, if you look at the way Heartbleed worked, you know, Heartbleed was actually part of SSL. So it took advantage of trust and then stuck a big number into what was supposed to be a small number. So you know, that's really the way that when we connect a lot of this stuff, when cars are talking to each other and they're talking to traffic lights and parking garages and drive-throughs and manhole covers and pylons and all this kind of stuff, this is where we're really going to start seeing trust across ecosystems have a negative influence. And like I said, if I want to attack a server, I'm going to get a hold of that person's client. So if I had to buy an ECU and pull your OTA client off of it and hack your OTA client and modify it and make your OTA client hack your OTA server, that's going to be a lot easier than multiple other ways of getting into I mean, I'm not trying to pick on OTA, but any kind of server, right? If there's a client out there that the server trusts, and I'm going to go after the client because I can get my hands on it, and I'm going to use it to go after the server because the server's going to trust it.
That, I think, brings us to a very logical conclusion of this hour-long session. Thank you very much for sharing your insight with us. Thank you to everybody who sent in questions and, of course, everybody who joined us today. I hope you found it as fascinating and as useful as I have. There will be a PDF version of the slides available for anybody to download along with the recording of the webinar, and we'll send an email within the next 24 hours to let you know how and when you can access that. With that, Stacy, thank you very much for sharing your insight today, and I look forward to seeing everybody at the next Automotive World webinar. Thanks very much, and goodbye.